The following scene is a dramatized hypothetical based on public royal protocol. Buckingham Palace had not yet awakened when Princess had entered the restricted records room. No photographers waited outside. No advisors followed her inside. Only a sealed black register rested beneath the light, carrying instructions connected to a future state ceremony, and opened it without hesitation. 5 entries had been marked in red. Each was connected to Queen Camilla's non-royal family. Beside them appeared the same instruction: remove from automatic placement, and studied the first name, drew a line through it, and moved to the next. The second disappeared. Then the third. By the time she reached the fourth, the decision already appeared irreversible. But the 5th entry made her pause. She looked toward the sealed door before turning the page. Beneath the final name were 2 handwritten initials belonging to Charles. They were followed by 4 words: proceed before anyone intervenes, and crossed out the 5th entry and closed the register. Nothing about the moment was ceremonial, yet its consequences could reach directly into Camilla's private family. 5 people who had expected future palace access were no longer listed. But Charles had added another instruction inside a sealed envelope, one and had not yet opened. And before anyone assumed she had altered the line of succession, one fact changed the entire meaning of the document. This was not a succession list. The register controlled something less constitutional, but far more visible than most people realized. It determined who would receive automatic access to restricted areas during future state ceremonies. The names inside could influence seating, transport, security clearance, official photography, and entry into private briefing rooms before the royal family appeared in public. Inclusion did not make someone royal, but it placed them close enough to the crown for the distinction to become difficult to see. That was the ambiguity and had been ordered to examine. The 5 Parker Bowles-linked entries carried no titles, inheritance rights, or constitutional authority. None belonged in the line of succession. Their presence simply meant that palace staff could treat them as expected ceremonial participants without requesting fresh approval for every occasion, and considered that assumption dangerous. A private family invitation came from affection. Automatic ceremonial access suggested institutional standing. Once repeated often enough, a temporary arrangement could begin to resemble a permanent royal privilege, and instructed the records officer to withdraw every copy of the register from the king's, queen's, and ceremonial households. Updated pages would be issued only after Charles reviewed her final recommendations. Then the officer delivered the first complication. 1 copy could not be recovered. It had been sent to another palace department the previous evening, before and entered the room. No one could confirm who had requested it or whether the 5 marked entries were still visible, and reopened the register and examined the 5th name again. Its inclusion appeared more recent than the others. Someone had added it after the original list was approved. And to understand why those family connections had entered palace protocol at all, and had to return to the ceremony that first placed them before the world. The connection began during the coronation of King Charles and Queen Camilla. For that historic ceremony, members of Camilla's family were given visible places inside Westminster Abbey. 3 of her grandsons, Freddie Parker Bowles, Louis Lopez, and Gus Lopez, served as pages of honor during the official procession. Their participation did not make them working royals. It did not place them in the line of succession or grant them permanent constitutional responsibilities. It represented something personal, Camilla's family standing beside her as she was crowned queen. But palace procedure has a way of preserving temporary arrangements. Names entered for one event can remain inside planning systems long after the original ceremony ends. Security teams retain previous clearances. Protocol officers study earlier seating plans. Ceremonial departments reuse old lists when preparing future occasions. In this scenario, 3 coronation entries gradually became 5 family-linked names inside the future access register. No formal order had expanded their position. No public announcement had created a new royal category. Each addition appeared administrative, reasonable in isolation, and almost invisible when viewed separately. Together, however, they produced something and could not ignore. A private family presence had begun to resemble automatic institutional access, and requested the authorization history for every entry, for carried references to earlier ceremonial planning. The fifth contained no clear origin. There was only a date, an unidentified approval code, and a note instructing staff to maintain continuity. Continuity with what? And wondered? The records officer could not answer. Neither could the Queen's household. Camilla believed the register protected her family from being treated as outsiders, and feared it created expectations that a future monarch would be forced to confront. Charles understood both positions. That was why he had not assigned the review to William, Camilla, or a constitutional advisor. He had placed it in the hands of the one person he trusted to separate family affection from royal duty. Charles chose, and because she occupied a position no advisor could reproduce. She was his sister, but she was also one of the monarchy's most disciplined working members. She understood the difference between supporting a family and protecting an institution. More importantly, she could deliver an uncomfortable decision without turning it into a public performance. Charles did not want William involved. If the Prince of Wales reviewed Camilla's family access, every change could be interpreted as preparation for his future reign. Even an administrative correction might appear to be William removing people connected to his stepmother before he inherited the crown. Camilla could not lead the review either. Asking her to decide which relatives should retain ceremonial access would place her between palace protocol and her own children and grandchildren. So Charles issued a narrow fictional instruction. Examine the 5 entries. Remove any automatic privileges unsupported by official roles and recommend a private alternative where appropriate. It was a review, not a command to erase anyone, but an interpreted one sentence more strictly than Charles's advisors expected. No family connection should create assumed institutional standing. That sentence led directly to the 5 lines she drew through the register before leaving the records room, and finally opened the sealed envelope attached to Charles's authorization. Inside was a handwritten condition the king had deliberately withheld from the administrative file. The 5 names were not to be abandoned. They were to be transferred into a separate private family category, allowing personal invitations without automatic ceremonial access, and understood the logic immediately. But she also recognized the danger. If the crossed-out page was seen without the replacement page, the review would look like a royal purge. She ordered both documents kept together. Then her private secretary entered with news that made the protection meaningless. Queen Camilla had already received a copy containing only the removals, and she was on her way to confront, and before Charles could explain what he had approved, Camilla entered Anne's private sitting room, carrying the revised page in one hand. She did not raise her voice. That made the confrontation more severe. 5 family-linked entries had been crossed out without a conversation, warning, or explanation. To Camilla, the page did not look like an administrative correction. It looked like a declaration that the people who had supported her before she entered the monarchy were being pushed outside it, and asked whether she had received the replacement page. Camilla had not. All she had seen were 5 names, 5 red lines, and Anne's signature beneath the changes. She reminded and that her family had endured years of public scrutiny without demanding royal status. Their presence during the coronation had not been an attempt to enter the succession or claim constitutional influence. They had stood beside her because they were her children and grandchildren, and did not dispute that. But she explained that private loyalty could not create automatic palace access indefinitely. A future ceremony required fresh decisions, not assumptions inherited from an earlier reign. Camilla placed the page on the table. Does becoming queen mean my family must disappear? She asked in this dramatized exchange. Anne's answer was immediate. No. It means the institution must know when they are present as your family, and when someone is presenting them as part of the crown. Then, Anne revealed that Charles had authorized the review. For the first time, Camilla's controlled expression broke. She had expected resistance from palace officials. She had not expected her husband to approve the process secretly and open the authorization file, but stopped before showing Camilla the hidden condition. One unresolved entry still troubled her. The fifth name had been added after Charles approved the original ceremonial framework. Its authorization code belonged to no office and could identify. Until she knew who inserted it, she would not restore or transfer any entry. Camilla believed and was exceeding Charles's instructions, and believed someone had already exceeded them first. Only the king could settle the dispute. But when Charles was informed, he did not immediately defend either woman. He asked to see the mysterious fifth authorization code, and the moment he recognized it, the entire review changed direction. The authorization code did not belong to a secret royal office or a member of Camilla's family. It came from a temporary coronation planning unit that had ceased operating after the 2023 ceremony. The fifth entry had been carried forward automatically when its records were transferred into the permanent palace system. No one had secretly demanded special treatment. An administrative process had preserved access that was originally created for a single historic occasion. That discovery removed suspicion, but it did not solve the larger problem. Charles explained what the fictional register actually controlled. Crossing out the 5 entries would not remove anyone from the royal family, because Camilla's relatives were not constitutional members of the monarchy. It would not affect succession, titles, inheritance, or personal relationships. Princess and possessed no authority to alter those matters. The changes concerned automatic ceremonial treatment, pre-approved transport, restricted waiting areas, official seating reviews, and entry into certain palace briefing spaces. Camilla's family could still attend events as her invited guests. They could enter royal residences when personally invited. They could appear at private family occasions and receive consideration for future ceremonies. What disappeared was the assumption that their access required no new approval. Charles then showed Camilla the condition and had found inside his sealed envelope. Every removed entry was to be transferred into a private family category. The names were not being erased. They were being separated from the institutional machinery of the crown. For Camilla, the distinction mattered, but so did the secrecy. Had Charles explained his purpose earlier, 5 red lines would never have looked like a rejection of her family, and admitted that completing the removals before issuing the replacement page had created the same misunderstanding she had been trying to prevent. Charles ordered both pages released together to the relevant palace offices. But the protection came too late. The missing copy had already reached someone outside the review. Only the crossed-out page had been photographed, and the image was moving toward the press. By the time the replacement page was circulated, Britain would see 5 removed Parker Bowles names without knowing where they had gone. In this scenario, the photograph reached a royal news desk shortly before sunrise. It showed 5 Parker Bowles-linked entries crossed out beneath N's authorization. The replacement page was missing. So was Charles's instruction explaining that the names were being transferred rather than erased. Within hours, an administrative review became a royal war. Headlines claimed and had expelled Camilla's family from future palace life. Commentators described the changes as preparation for William's eventual reign. Others interpreted Charles's initials as evidence that the king had secretly approved a personal rejection of his wife's relatives. None of those conclusions reflected the complete document, and refused to issue a rushed denial. She wanted the source identified before the palace confirmed which parts of the register were authentic. Camilla also remained silent, knowing that any emotional response would strengthen the appearance of a family rupture. William warned that silence carried its own danger. Every hour without clarification allowed speculation to harden into accepted truth. The leak page contained one useful detail, a nearly invisible printer mark identifying the office where the copy had been produced. It led to a ceremonial scheduling department, not N's office, Camilla's household, or William's team. An employee had prepared the page for routine circulation before the review was complete. There was no evidence that a member of the royal family had authorized its release. The palace drafted a statement explaining that no titles, succession rights, or private relationships had changed. Charles read it once, then ordered his staff not to publish it, and was stunned. Camilla believed the king was allowing damaging speculation to continue. William asked what could possibly be more important than correcting the story immediately. Charles returned to the original register and placed his hand over the 5 entries. The public explanation, he said, addressed what Anne had done. It did not explain why he had asked her to do it. And, until the family understood his real motive, another statement would only hide the decision that had shaped the entire review. Charles's real concern was not Camilla's family during his reign. It was what would happen to them after it. As long as Charles remained king, palace officials understood why Camilla's children and grandchildren might receive personal invitations or ceremonial consideration. But under William, the same inherited access could become confusing. Staff might continue treating private relatives of a former queen as though they held permanent institutional roles. Charles wanted to prevent that uncertainty before it became William's problem. He had asked Anne to separate affection from authority, not because he wanted Camilla's family pushed away, but because he wanted their relationship with the monarchy protected from future accusations of privilege. The private family category achieved that purpose. It preserved personal invitations while making clear that every official role required fresh approval. Camilla finally understood why Charles had kept the review away from William. If the Prince of Wales had ordered the changes, they would look like an incoming monarch, removing his stepmother's influence. By acting during his own reign, Charles accepted responsibility himself, and then revealed one final detail. Although all 5 names had been removed from automatic future access, one previously confirmed ceremonial clearance would remain valid until the event connected to it had concluded, and had not canceled an existing commitment. She had stopped it from automatically becoming precedent. The distinction changed Camilla's interpretation of the entire register. The 5 red lines were not a punishment. They were a boundary. Charles was ensuring that her family would be welcomed because they were loved, not because an old administrative code continued opening palace doors. But Charles's silence had allowed protection to resemble rejection. He now authorized Anne to publish a limited clarification confirming that no titles, succession positions, or private invitations had changed, and looked again at the leak page. Correcting the public story would be simple. Repairing the trust damaged inside the family would not. Before the final register could be closed, and then Camilla had to decide whether those 5 names represented what the crown had removed, or what Charles had quietly preserved. In this scenario, Anne returned to the restricted records room with Camilla beside her. The original register remained open beneath the same light. 5 names were still crossed out from automatic ceremonial access, but a second page now carried them under a new heading: Private Family Invitations, subject to approval. Nothing had been taken from the line of succession because the names had never appeared there. No titles had been canceled. No family member had been banned from the palace. The review had changed procedure, not blood. Camilla accepted the distinction. Her relatives would enter future events as her family, not as unofficial representatives of the crown. Charles admitted that secrecy had been his greatest mistake. By attempting to prevent conflict, he had allowed an administrative decision to look like a personal betrayal, and completed the register and preserved the temporary clearance attached to the previously confirmed ceremony. After that event, every future invitation would require deliberate approval. The palace released a limited clarification explaining that no constitutional status had changed. It did not reveal the private disagreement or identify the 5 entries, and then closed the register. The names had disappeared from one list, but they had not been erased from a family. Charles had protected Camilla's relatives by defining where personal affection ended and royal authority began. The crown had not removed 5 people. It had removed an assumption. Subscribe for our next royal investigation into how William could reshape the wider palace household.